Yo, what's up everyone? Welcome back to another episode of NFL Talk of Elite Wages. Obviously by now you should know that I am Elite Wages, and just before we get into it, I want to have a quick little recap on what we've been doing over the last few weeks. The last few weeks have been fun. We've been chilling, watching some preseason NFL games, watching teams shape up and mold into their schemes, watching players fight for positions and things like that. And I've also shared my thoughts on the NFC and the AFC. I did breakdowns of each division and each team within those conferences. So if you missed those, go back and take a listen. I throw out a lot of key information in those episodes, and hopefully they can help educate you guys before this season kicks off. Now we're only a few days away from NFL kickoff. My first episode on my podcast were all my future bets that I'm taking this season. So I shared all the plays, all the breakdowns. So before this season starts, definitely do not miss that episode, because once the season starts, there's no going back. So go back to that episode, take a listen to all my future bets and things like that. Hopefully you tail along, and we have some fun while seeing out this season. Before I get into my NFL Week 1 plays, I want to give a huge shout out to everyone who supported me and the launch of my podcast up to now. I wasn't sure if I was even going to start. It's been stressful, but we finally did it. We finally made it. So thanks to everyone that keeps coming back and taking a listen. Will listen to me talk about football. But there's two guys in particular I want to give a personal shout out to. The first is my guy, Daily College Bets. Man, we've known each other for a hot minute now. It's been a pleasure. Appreciate all your help and everything. It really does mean a lot. Everyone go give this guy a follow. He's the absolute GOAT of college football. I'll tag him in the bio below. The second guy, my man Wiley Coyote. You've helped support me from the jump, giving me shout outs and advice. It's been really helpful, so thank you for that. Your streams and YouTube videos have been a form of stress relief when I've been stressful doing all this podcast and stuff. So again, thank you very much for that. Everyone go over to Wiley Coyote on YouTube and Twitch. Watch this guy crush some Madden. I'll tag both of the guys in the bio. So thank you very much for you too. Okay, so now my recap and my little shout outs are all over and done with. Let's get into NFL Week 1. It's been a long time coming. Let's go. Let's get into it. So the first game is a Thursday night football game. So we start off this 2024 NFL season with current Super Bowl champions Kansas City Chiefs facing their AFC conference opponents from last season, the Baltimore Ravens, at Arrowhead on Thursday Night Football. The Chiefs start off their three-peat campaign in pursuit of their three-peat, facing potentially one of their biggest rivals for this upcoming season. With the betting spread set at -3 favouring the Chiefs, it was hard to really find an edge to be confident in this game. Kansas City and Baltimore Ravens are both very, very good offensively and defensively. Baltimore ranking as a top 5 defense with a top 3 offense, as well as the Chiefs being a top 3 defense and a top 8 offense, so both top in the league in offense and defense. They virtually match each other stride for stride in most categories on offense and in defense. But first of all, in terms of the defensive statistics, for instance, Baltimore led the league in NFL sacks last season with 57. Second place was the Kansas City Chiefs with 54. So 1 and 2 in sacks for last season. They were both 1 and 2 in least amount of points allowed to opponents. 16.2 to Baltimore, 17 for Kansas City Chiefs. And they were first and third for total yardage allowed to opponents. Baltimore first and then Kansas City third. In pass defense, they were 4th and 6th in passing yards allowed. Kansas City had 185, Baltimore had 193. So only 8 yards separating them from 4th and 6th. And they both finished in the top 3 for least pass yards per completion to opponents. All in all, they're both matching each other as top defenses. In terms of the offense, the Ravens were a much better rushing team than the Chiefs. Obviously, they had Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, or J.K. Dobbins was injured, but Gus Edwards and Lamar Jackson in their run game. Expected that they would be the better rushing team of the two. They led the league in rushing attempts last year. rushing yards per rush, and they were also third in rushing touchdowns per game as well. While the Chiefs, they were in the bottom half of the league for some of those same categories. Obviously, the run game has improved again for the Ravens with them adding Derrick Henry now as well. In terms of production, it should be a very similar like for like. Obviously, Gus Edwards had 10 plus rushing touchdowns last year. Derrick Henry also had 10 plus rushing touchdowns as well. So both like for like acquisitions there. Obviously, I'm going to say Derrick Henry is a lot better than Gus Edwards, so it's an improvement for them. The Chiefs, they were surprisingly up and down towards the end of last year. They started 7-2, so they had a very, very hot start, 7-2. They had a Week 10 bye, and then after their Week 10 bye, they finished their last 8 games 4-4. Couldn't sort of hit that first half of the season stride, and they went 4-4. Ravens, on the other hand, they stayed consistent the whole way through the season. They ended their season with a 13-4 record. Both teams made key acquisitions and additions in the offseason. The key acquisition for the Kansas City Chiefs was a new left tackle to try and protect Patrick Mahomes, as well as keeping most of the pieces on defense that made them finish as the third highest defensive team last year. Obviously lost L'Jarius Sneed, but all in all, they kept Chris Jones. That was a huge one, keeping Chris Jones. So they kept a lot of their defensive unit together. As for the Ravens, they added a few new faces in their pass protection. They also let a lot of their key defensive personnel leave this offseason as well. But with their player development, it's hard to believe that the Ravens let those guys go without having players that they believe will be just as effective in those same positions to take their roles on from week 1 this year. The Chiefs, they were one of the best teams to bet on for the under last season, with 66% of their games going under their game total. Their record to the under was 14-7. And that's obviously including the playoffs as well. And the Ravens being a near 50-50 team with a 10-8 record to the under, obviously including playoffs as well. The total for this game is set at 46.5. The Kansas City Chiefs went under a total of 46.5 last season in 15 out of 17 regular season games. They also split their 4 playoff games 2-2 to this under as well. Baltimore Ravens games from last season went under a total of 46.5 in 10 out of 17 regular season games, and both playoff games, including the AFC Championship game against the Chiefs, going under that total as well. As I said, this game is a rematch of the AFC Conference Finals last year. Potentially this season's AFC Conference game again too. Both teams have high hopes to reach the Super Bowl again. Games like this already could be crucial in terms of the Super Bowl chances for the upcoming season. Both teams are battling for that Super Bowl spot in the AFC. Getting one up on a potential rival could give you the edge later in the season as well. So as talented as both of these teams are on offense, I think it's going to be a defensive game, and I think it comes down to the old saying, defense wins championships. Both teams were effective in getting to the opposition quarterback last season, generating pressures, and obviously sacks, being 1 and 2 in sacks last year. I'm going to be backing both defenses to stand strong and counter each other's offense out in this opening game. So one unit on Kansas City Chiefs and the Baltimore Ravens under 46.5 at odds of 1.9. The second game I'm going to run with is the Texans money line. Expectations are high for the Texans after they won the AFC South last year with a 10-7 record. They are the favourites to win their division again. They've also got reasonable odds to win the AFC and Super Bowl as well. Texans fans believe there's no reason why head coach D'Amico Ryans and his team can't accomplish all of that this season. It's easy to be high on the Texans team that went from potential worst to first with CJ Stroud in his first season in the NFL. CJ Stroud, he stunned everyone last season as he broke records all season long on his way to Offensive Rookie of the Year. The Texans got lucky that they selected a rookie quarterback that was able to lead a team. He looked like a seasoned pro in the process. CJ ended his year with over 4,100 pass yards, 23 touchdowns, and he only had 5 interceptions all year long as well. His quarterback rating was 100 on average, obviously, which is the 6th highest from starting quarterbacks last season. He had an amazing season without a true running back 1 or a true wide receiver 1. Singletary helped him out with over 1,000 scrimmage yards, as well as Nico Collins. He had 1,200 receiving yards. Obviously, Tank Dell as well. He added another 700. So again, no sort of running back 1, true running back 1, true wide receiver 1 in terms of elite status. Now the second-year signal caller has an even better roster around him, and more importantly for him, he's got more weapons. Obviously signing Stephon Diggs, he's had 6 1,000-yard seasons in a row, and also adding Joe Mixon from the Bengals, he's had 1,000-yard rushing yards in all seasons where he's played 16 games or more. So if Joe Mixon can stay healthy, he can certainly help this offense, the Houston offense, who finished in the bottom 5 for rush yards per game last year, and yards per carry. He can improve those numbers just with that one signing. So Joe Mixon looking to improve their run game. I think he can do it as well. I think he's a very, very good, talented runner. On the other side of the ball, in the Indianapolis Colts, they also have had a good young quarterback whose season was unexpectedly and unfortunately cut short last year after a shoulder injury in week 4. Sidelined him for the rest of the season. But due to this, I expect there to be a settling in phase again for the Colts and this offense. They haven't really played together as a unit with obviously Richardson for too long, and obviously they've added new faces in the draft and in offseason as well. So Jonathan Taylor, he's also back after an injury hit year. He was up and down all year. Indy will now face a top 10 run defense in terms of opposition yardage and yards per carry from last season. That's not the most ideal situation for Jonathan Taylor or Richardson. They both, obviously, Taylor being a running back, but Richardson, he loves to run. Indy will now face one of the top total defenses in the league, as the Texans have strengthened their defensive unit. They added Hunter from the Vikings. He totaled a career high 16.5 sacks last season. They also added top tackler Al Shahir, who also had a career year last year with 163 total tackles, which put him right up there with the best last year. Add to that the prospect of playing an offense which is also ranked near the top of the league, led by CJ Stroud, a new offensive unit in effect, new playmakers, Joe Mixon, Stephon Diggs at his disposal. I'm not concerned about the game being a home game for the Colts. The Colts actually went 4-5 in home games last year. They actually lost to the Texans when they visited in Week 18. The scoreline was 23-19, but both teams seem to be on different trajectories this season. The Texans aiming for division title, possibly a conference title game, and a Super Bowl isn't sort of out of reach this year. But one thing that Houston will need to do to achieve these feats is to win these tricky divisional matchups, and that starts with the Colts in Week 1. So again, this is another 1-unit play. Texans money line at odds of 1.75. So we're going to get back to another total, and this total is going to be another under. So we're going to back another under in Week 1. And believe it or not, this isn't a fade of either offense, even though it might not be a bad idea. This is more of a tail in both defenses. One of the biggest acquisitions to start the offseason was the Falcons signing quarterback Kirk Cousins to help boost their offense that was ranked as the 7th worst for points last season. As well as that, they were the 10th worst in passing yards too. Kirk Cousins will bring that elite quarterback play that they've been missing for many years since prime Matt Ryan, and he also brought along a new target in Darnell Mooney to pair with Drake London. As for the Steelers, they also made quite a loud acquisition in the quarterback room. They got Russell Wilson from the Broncos, and not just Russell Wilson, they also brought Justin Fields from the Chicago Bears. Russell has just been named quarterback 1, And just like Cousins and the Falcons, Russ will bring them that elite quarterback play that they've been missing since Big Ben. Just like Cousins brought a new target, Russ did the same, bringing over former Falcons Cordero Patterson. In my opinion, this is my opinion, I believe Justin Fields would have been the better fit for this Steelers offense. Obviously, they paid a lot of money to Russ Wilson. He was always going to be quarterback one. There was no doubt in that. But in my opinion, the Steelers have been consistently winning. They've had a winning record consistently for a number of years since Mike Tomlin. He's never had a losing season. So for me, their sort of quarterback play has always been in the stature of Big Ben. Not really a running type. So they've had Big Ben, wasn't a runner. Kenny Pickett, also not a runner. Mason Rudolph, Mitch Trubisky, none of them were sort of clear-cut runners. Now you bring in Russ Wilson, who obviously is that running. He's a mobile quarterback, but he's aging now. He's getting on a little bit. So I believe the right thing to do was bring in Justin Fields. They're trying that new sort of dynamic type of quarterback that many teams are doing. Obviously, you look at the Ravens. Lamar Jackson, he's set the league on fire, 2-time MVP, and that's mainly down to his passing accuracy and his mobility. So I think the way forward for the Steelers is to go to a more mobile quarterback, and I think that is what's going to elevate them from just being a winning team to a playoff contending team. I think they need that mobility. I'm not saying Justin Fields is that guy and he's the guy that's going to get them a Super Bowl or anything like that. I'm saying that is the type of quarterback that they need to move forward with. I don't believe Russell Wilson is the same player that he once was. I think the Steelers would have been better off pursuing Justin Fields. Obviously, they signed Russell Wilson first and then got Justin Fields, but I believe Fields would have been the more suitable fit in this offense. But obviously, the Steelers did what they think is best, and hopefully it works out for them. It'd be interesting to see this season if it does work out, and if it doesn't, how soon they bring in Justin Fields. I know they've said that in terms of play calling, they're setting up packages for Justin Fields. So that'll be interesting if he performs them well, how often he comes in and things like that. But for now, Russell Wilson is quarterback one, and obviously he can do an absolutely solid job. The Falcons' offense last year was bad, but the Steelers was actually worse. The Steelers ranked as the 5th worst offense for points, as well as being the 8th worst passing yards, and the 4th least pass completions. Both Cousins and Wilson or Fields, whoever gets the nod. Well, obviously it's Wilson, but if Fields comes in throughout this season, it applies to him as well. They're an improvement on both offenses from last year. Both teams have a clear running back one. Robinson and Najee Harris. They both had over 1,300 scrimmage yards last season. Both teams have a clear-cut wide receiver one. Obviously, Drake London, George Pickens. I do expect Cousins and Wilson to improve this team. I do expect it, but do I expect it to impact them a great deal? And I'm not too sure, especially not in this game. Time will tell on these two new look teams, but one thing I'm sure of, that I don't think these two new quarterbacks will have a successful first week, and I think it'll be a tough game for the first game in their new colours in week one. The Steelers might have had a bad offense for last year and the last few years, but they've managed to continuously win. That's mainly down to the fact they've had a top defense for many years, led by TJ Watt, Cam Hayward up front, Minkah Fitzpatrick in the secondary. The Steelers held opponents to the 8th least points and forced the 6th most incompletions as well. They also allowed opposing quarterback the 10th lowest quarterback rating in the NFL last season. Obviously they added Patrick Queen into that as well. So adding Patrick Queen to Alex Highsmith to solidify the middle of the field, you've got yourself an even better defense on top of an already top 5 defense from last season. On the other side, as for the Falcons, they haven't always been at the top or the top of the league in defensive rankings. Last season they sat in the middle of the league in most defensive categories. Their hopes of their trio from Grady Jarrett, Calais Campbell and Bud Dupree, they would have given them an elite pass rush last year, but it turned out to be fairly mediocre. Grady Jarrett found himself with some injury struggles. Campbell and Bud Dupree both underperformed. It's simple as that. They underperformed, didn't play as well as they were expected to. So the Falcons moved on from both Campbell and Bud Dupree, and they traded for Matthew Judon from the Patriots, and I believe he is their answer. He's in prime position to kickstart the pass rush. He's now healthy himself. He led the Patriots in sacks 2 seasons ago. A couple of injuries last season, but he's now fully healthy, as is Grady Jarrett. So you've got 2 healthy elite pass rushers. As for the secondary, they outperformed their pass rush last year. They finished the season allowing the 8th least yards to opposing quarterbacks. That was led by AJ Terrell and Jesse Bates. And now they've also just traded for Justin Simmons, and he's been a top safety for many years, and he's there to help this defense improve further, especially the secondary. So last season both the Falcons and the Steelers were profitable while backing the under. The Steelers go in 11-6 to the under, and the Falcons 10-7 to the under. The under this game is being set at 42.5. The Steelers went under this number in 13 of 17 games last year, and the Falcons, they went under in 10 of 17. Despite both offenses getting an upgrade, I expect both defenses to shine through, and I expect them to counteract each other's new offensive acquisitions. Obviously, the same saying goes, defense wins championships. I'm not sure these two are championship contenders, but we'll roll with the same theory in defense wins games. So this is a 1-unit play. Atlanta Falcons, Pittsburgh Steelers under 42.5 at odds of 1.9. And I'm going to take a little break in my plays. I do have a small announcement to make. Good news. Elite Wagers have recently partnered with a cool NFL fantasy football app called FantasyGamedayApp. This app allows you to be the GM and take charge of your own football team by selecting players at quarterback, running back, tight end, as well as giving you a slot which allows one particular player to earn double points for that game week. I personally use this app every week because it has a competitive budget to use while selecting your players to create your team. It also has a reasonably priced buy-in and has really cool prize pots to win each week. Sign up today and use my promotion code ELITE, ELITE, which will credit you with 1 free entry after your first buy-in. Each week I'll be giving advice on 2 players that I am selecting in my team for that particular game week, one of which will be used in my captain slot, which will earn double points, and the other being a value player, which is fairly low in price and will allow you to save budget for those more expensive players, but also still has the potential upside in scoring points for your team. Now, with that being said, I'm actually really excited to go through my fantasy selections this week. I've been doing fantasy football for years and years. This is the first time I've actually done anything in terms of tipping it or sharing my thoughts and opinions on it. So let's go for this one. Fantasy football selections this week. As I said, I'm going to go through 2 selections. The first one being the person I'm going to be captaining, which gives double points, and the second one being a value player, which allows you to save in your budget with still having the prospect of potentially getting some points that other players won't have. So the first one, week 1, the first week of NFL fantasy football season. For this week, my selection for my captain slot, which again is the player that's going to earn double points. It's going to be a new offseason acquisition for the Houston Texans. It's going to be their running back, Joe Mixon. Last season, when Mixon was a Bengal, he had 1,410 yards from scrimmage all season. That averages out to 82 yards per game, scrimmage yards from scrimmage. And he also finished with a total of 12 total touchdowns. Last season, Mixon ran behind an offensive line that was ranked as 21st in the league. This season, he's now a Texan. The Texans' O-line last year, they were only ranked one place lower, so they were ranking in 22nd. but they've had their fair share of injuries. They should be much improved this year. Injuries aren't thought to be a concern this year so far, so this should give Mixon more opportunities. This week's matchup, the Texans face the Indianapolis Colts. Last season, the Colts were ranked as the 5th worst against opposing running backs. They allowed an average of 103 rushing yards per game, which was the 6th most, as well as allowing 4 yards per carry and almost 1 touchdown per game. It averages out to 0.94 touchdowns to running backs on average. The Colts, they were also allowing running backs to be used effectively in the pass game as well. We all know Joe Mixon is a dual threat back. He can be used in the pass game and in the run game. But the Colts, they allowed running backs the 10th most receptions with 5 and the 5th most receiving yards with 42 receiving yards on average. On average, the Colts allowed 145 yards from scrimmage and 1 touchdown to running back per game. So in terms of fantasy, they allowed running backs 20 points per game on average. And with Mixon running the Texan ship at running back, he should see the majority of these points. Based on last season's stats and based on the season rushing total, touchdown total for Joe Mixon, I see Mixon having over a 50% chance of scoring a touchdown in each game this season. I predict Mixon will finish this game with 100 plus yards from scrimmage and 1 touchdown, which will account for roughly 16 fantasy points. And he will be my captain as well this week, so that means he receives double. So he could potentially end this week with 30 fantasy points in week 1. So Joe Mixon, he will cost you £6,000 in this lineup. It might sound a lot. Go over to the app, have a look at the prices. I'd say that's reasonably priced. He could potentially get you 30 fantasy points in week 1. That'd be a good start. Over to my second selection, which is the value pick. So the league average price per player is set at around £5,000. So when I say I'm looking for a value player, I mean a player that is way under that budget. But with them being under that budget, I'm still looking for the potential upside in scoring points. So my value pick this week, I'm going to be looking to save my budget wherever possible. So I'm going to go with another new signing for a team, and I'm going to go with the Washington Commanders tight end, Zach Ertz. When healthy, everyone knows Zach Ertz can be a beast. He's done it for Philly for many years. He made some awesome plays for the Cardinals last few seasons as well, but he hasn't completed a full season since 2018. Luckily for us, we don't need him to be healthy for a full season. Obviously, it'd be healthy if we wanted to reuse him again. All we need is week 1 for now. So Zach Ertz, he's been operating in training camp as the tight end 1 under new offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury. The potential for Zach Ertz to have a big game is intriguing. It's more intriguing for him to have the possibility of a big game than it is when you go back and look at his stats from the last few seasons. He's had injury plagued the last couple of seasons. He's been hit with injuries, and that's sort of halted his productivity. He heads this season healthy. Obviously, tight end 1 under new offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury as well. So it's on the upside for him. So last season, the Commanders tight end Logan Thomas, he was their tight end 1. He finished the season with the 4th highest receiving yards on the team, and he had the tied most receiving yards as well. I think there was him and 3 others that had 4 touchdowns for the Commanders. The Commanders' opponents this week is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Last season, the Bucs were the 3rd worst defense against tight ends. They allowed the 3rd most fantasy points with an average of 8.32. And they allowed tight ends an average of 63 receiving yards on 6 receptions per game. Now, this doesn't sound a lot, but the ceiling for tight ends in this league isn't very high, so for them to give up around 8, that's quite a reasonable number. You get 1 point per reception, and you get 1 point per 10 yards as well, so keep that in mind when you think about these selections. The average fantasy points for a tight end is on the lower end of the scale, which is why I've chosen this position to save some budget. I predict Zach Ertz will end the game with around 30 receiving yards, with 2, maybe 3 receptions, and he obviously also has that potential of a few red zone targets with his height and things like that, so bear that in mind. With his roughly his 30 receiving yards, 3 receptions, that'll roughly account for 5 to 6 fantasy points, but hopefully one of those receptions will be in the end zone to add another 6 points as he scores a touchdown as well. So Zach Ertz, he's available at 2,600 points. He's a good value player, saves a really big chunk of money there with the averages 5,000, so he saves almost half of that. So yeah, everyone, good luck this week. Let me know how you get on in the comments below, and we'll run this back next week. Alright then, let's get back to the plays. I'm going to run now with 2 underdog bets that I'm playing this week. The first one, it's going to be obviously my first underdog selection from this week, and I'm not going to say I'm happy to fade Caleb Williams and this new look Bears team, but I am quite high on this Titans team. So the play this week is going to be the Titans plus 4.5. I believe they've flown way under the radar this offseason. I don't think many people are aware of the potential that they have. In a way that's kind of done them a huge favour. You know, the hype of the Bears and the hype of all these new quarterbacks around the league, all the battles for quarterback one, and off-season acquisitions and trade rumours, holdouts, things like that. It's sort of put the Titans on a list where no one's sort of looking. No one's really paid much attention to what they've been able to do with this team, and they've had some really good off-season additions. Obviously losing Derrick Henry, that's a huge loss, but they have added Tony Pollard, and he will ensure they don't entirely lose their run game. He's been a solid runner in Dallas. A lot of Derrick Henry's success is obviously his own talent. He's a very, very talented runner, but Pollard, he's got a lot of talent on his own level as well. He might not be glorified as much as Derrick Henry, but he's had back-to-back 1,000 rushing yard seasons while running back one for Dallas. I believe he can sort of step into that running back one role here, and he can certainly do a job to ensure the Titans are able to run the ball on the ground. Levis has been given the keys to the Titans ship. He's been given a good running back. He's been given a good runner in Tony Pollard. He's also been given Calvin Ridley and Tyler Boyd to team up with DeAndre Hopkins. That's a good solid 3 wide receiver set right there. Ridley and Hopkins being on this Titans roster now means they have a 1,000 plus yard wide receiver duo based on last season. So there's only 4 teams last season that had that, and obviously you add in Tyler Boyd as well. He's no slouch in the receiving aspect either. He's averaging over 850 yards in his last 6 seasons, and you've got to bear in mind with him as well, he's been wide receiver 3 for the Bengals behind Chase and Higgins. So Hopkins is listed as questionable for this game with a knee injury. If he is out, I'm confident in Ridley and Boyd, and they'll be ready to go as makeshift wide receiver 1 and 2. Tennessee's offense, they struggled quite a lot last year. Their O-line, they were in need for the Titans in the draft. They selected Latham, who was number 2 rated offensive lineman prospect in the draft, as well as adding Cushenberry, who only allowed 1 sack last season. So they've got 2 solid O-linemen there. They finished in the bottom half of the league in points scored, red zone trips, and even field goal attempts. So they struggled to get the ball down the field when it mattered as well. So I think they've done what they needed to improve on those numbers this season. defensively, their secondary, that has been their weak point. But during the offseason, they made some really, really aggressive moves for some top players to improve in that area. They signed another former Bengal, Awuzie at cornerback, and along with the number 50 voted player in this year's NFL Top 100, L'Jarius Sneed. Filling out the rest of the secondary, they added Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs to Amani Hooker, who obviously was already here, and that totally revamped the whole secondary unit. So they got 4, Pro Bowl-esque players, and it's revamped the whole secondary. And honestly, it should drastically improve their results from last season. While their focus was mainly on improving the secondary, they also improved their pass rush as well. They signed Ernest Jones Jr. from the LA Rams. They selected Sweat in the draft as well. Sweat was graded a 90 plus in both run defense and a 90 plus in pass rush as well. He also finished as the FBS number 1 tackle in wins above average grade as well. So two new players there. Ernest Jones, I think, gets 6.5 sacks on last season as well. So they've added sacks as well. They were also able to keep Simmons, Key, Landry. I think Key is on the list. He's not sure if he's going to be available for this game, but they managed to keep Simmons, Key, and Landry the third. Those 4 alone, obviously minus Sweat, they combined for 24.5 sacks last season, just between those 4. You add in Sweat, that could be potentially destructive for any team. Like I said at the beginning of this selection, the Bears, they've been a team on the people's minds. They've been on everyone's lips. Everyone's reading into them a lot. They obviously took Caleb Williams. They added a lot of new players around him as well. They added Swift in the backfield, Keenan Allen to pair with DJ Moore. They drafted Awuzie as well, Dunze. And honestly, I get the hype. I get it. I'm a Packers fan, so I've read into this team a lot as well, and I really like the potential that they have. Their roster looks very good. They're looking like they've bonded well, as we've seen on Hard Knocks this year. But again, going back to my future bets on what I mentioned about the Bears, I think to back them to win by 5 this early in the season after all these new faces, it's a little bit too much to ask. I think they will eventually be able to contend, but I think it's going to take them a few games to brush off some rust, get over some of the nerves, especially for those rookies. It's going to take a few games to brush off some of the rust. Keenan Allen, things like that. He hasn't played in a long time now, so I know a lot of people won't like me for fading the Bears after this, this visibly improved team. But it's safe to say the Titans have improved their roster just as much, if not more. They've added all these players during this off-season. They've flown way under the radar. A lot of people haven't even took notice, and ultimately, I think the pass rush has enough to cause Williams problems. I think if you look at the Bears in pre-season, Williams has had to make plays on the move. The Bears O-line struggled to keep Justin Fields in place. Obviously, Fields was a good runner, but the Bears O-line, it struggled to keep Fields safe, and in pre-season it started to do the same with Caleb Williams. He's had to move out the pocket and make some plays on the run as well. So I think the Titans pass rush has enough to get to Williams and disrupt Williams a lot, cause him some problems. I think the secondary has enough to keep the Bears receivers quiet. I think that O-line can keep the Bears pass rush away, and I think Will Levis has enough he's got enough weapons to score points. I think they're ready for the challenge of the Chicago Bears in Week 1, and I think they're also ready for the rest of the league with this new and improved roster. So we're going to go with another 1-unit bet. That's the Tennessee Titans plus 4.5 at 1.90. And we're going to go final play, another dog, another underdog. This is probably my favourite one, best to last all that. The line in this game started at -1 in favour of the Cleveland Browns. Now it favours Cleveland Browns by -2.5. I'm going to buy an extra half a point to make this a +3 for the Cowboys. in the case that they lose by a field goal to the Browns, in that instance, we will get a push and we'll get the stake returned. But honestly, I don't think we even need the points in this game. All this line movement happened before some key news for both teams. Obviously, a few days ago, CeeDee Lamb signed a contract extension. All this money. He's now back in the team. He's going to be active in week 1, and also Nick Chubb. He'll start the season on the physically unable to perform list, which means he misses the first 4 games, which obviously includes week 1. So you've got a positive there for the Cowboys with CeeDee Lamb, and you've got a negative for Cleveland with Nick Chubb. So I'm actually unsure why the line has moved from -1 before this news came out to -2.5 when this news dropped. But what I do know is both teams have really solid defensive units. The Browns ranked as the second best defense last season, and for the first few months of the season they were ranked as number 1. They managed to hold their opponents to 55.6% completion rate and a 73.2 quarterback rating with 32 sacks. They also had a 10-9 touchdown to interception ratio in the first 12 weeks. So they only allowed 10 quarterback touchdown passes, and they forced 9 interceptions. That's crazy in the first 12 weeks. Then they soon realised how much they relied on Myles Garrett. He suffered a shoulder injury, as well as obviously they lost a few more names on the defense, but mainly Myles Garrett to a shoulder injury. So their injury hit Browns defense allowed 13 touchdowns, 9 interceptions with just 15 sacks in the final 6 games. So the sacks almost halved, and their interceptions continued. They got another 9, but the touchdowns allowed increased. So as for the Cowboys defense, they ranked 4th last season. They have I would say a new, but it's a returning defensive coordinator, Mike Zimmer. He rejoins the Cowboys and he looks to implement his defensive wisdom upon this talented group in Dallas. The Cowboys allowed opponents only 20 points per game, 18 completions per game, which was joint first with the Cleveland Browns. They allowed the 5th least total yards to opponents while having 46 sacks and 26 takeaways on the year. Just like the Browns and Myles Garrett, the Cowboys have their own one-man game wrecker in Micah Parsons. Parsons has been a consistent threat to quarterbacks. He's averaging 13.5 sacks in his first 3 years. Offensively, I think this is a fairly one-sided game. I think the Browns are favoured because of their defense and the possibility of Watson returning to his Texan days in terms of his form and his talent. He hasn't completed a full NFL season since 2020, and it would have actually been 302 days since he last stepped on a football field. So that's nearly a full year without even stepping on a field. He hasn't played preseason, obviously due to shoulder soreness. You add that to the fact Nick Chubb is out for the first 4 games. It gives me huge doubts on if this team can actually score points. As for Dallas, they've just extended CeeDee Lamb, so he'll be back in camp soon. Dak Prescott's coming off a solid year where he threw over 4,500 passing yards and 36 touchdowns. He finished second in MVP voting last year, which, in my opinion, I think he should have got it based on what he was able to do. He finished, obviously, second in MVP voting. Dallas re-signed Ezekiel Elliott, who's a long-time best mate for Dak Prescott. They've also just signed Dalvin Cook as well, so 2 vets, but they've both been solid running backs over the years. That's without mentioning Brandon Cooks, partner in CeeDee Lamb, Ferguson as well. He's also a very, very solid tight end. They were able to reconstruct Zach Martin's contract. They then drafted 2 new players in the first 3 picks to address their O-line issues, to obviously help improve that. Guyton didn't allow a sack in 355 pass rush attempts last season, and BB only allowed 2 sacks in 1,206 pass rush attempts across the last 2 seasons. That is an insane number. So hopefully those 2 guys can help Zach Martin keep Dak Prescott safe throughout this season and beyond. I think the consistency of having Dak Prescott, who is, when healthy, arguably a top 5 quarterback, who can consistently move his offense down the field, that benefits the Cowboys more than the possibility of the Browns having Watson back to his best. So we're going to back the Dallas Cowboys +3, obviously by the half a point. Cowboys +3 at 1.75. So that brings us to the end of this episode. I'll do a quick little run through on all my plays. Obviously I had the 2 fantasy football selections as well. But the plays, they're all 1 unit for now. First couple of weeks going to stay 1 unit until we see how sort of teams work in their new systems and things like that, and how they break into the season. So all 1 unit. We're going to start off with the Thursday night football game, Kansas City Chiefs and the Ravens under 46.5. That's at odds of 1.9. We've got the Falcons and Steelers under 42.5 at 1.9. The Houston Texans money line at odds of 1.75. The Titans at plus 4.5 at 1.9. And then the Dallas Cowboys, remember to buy that half a point for +3 at 1.75. So there's all the plays for this week. Cannot wait to get into this week. I'll be back again same time next week. It should be Wednesday every week going forward. If it's not Wednesday, it'll be before Thursday Night Football, but I'm going to try and get them out on Wednesday to give everyone enough time to get Thursday Night Football plays in, and then obviously tail Sunday, Monday, Tuesday for the UK. Again, don't forget to go over to my new partnership in fantasy football. I will link everything down below in the bio. Leave comments everywhere. Like, subscribe, share. Twitter, TikTok, Discord. Me and my guy Daily, I mentioned at the beginning. We've got a Discord. We run together. Jump in there. Links in the bio. I'll put my Linktree bio in. So get everywhere. Every major streaming platform for you get for your podcast. Take a listen. Share to all your friends. Keep it running. Keep it moving. And we'll keep on. Let's get it. See you next week.